Welcome to the session, Informed AgroExtension. This session will look at how we can enable farmers and agricultural extension workers to adopt sustainable and scalable practices, whether it's by having accurate and complete data, having user-friendly models, or making sure that we have points of connection to our communities. This session will explore how modelers, data scientists, and technology disruptors can build systems to inform ag extension.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our session around informed agro-extension. I'm very much looking forward to really digging in on what is enabling farmers and agricultural extension workers to adopt some of these sustainable and scalable practices we've been talking about this week. How do we have access to complete user-friendly models and data, as well as meaningful points of connection across communities for this type of information? How do we build these systems across modelers, data scientists, technology disruptors, and do it in a way that's really benefiting farmers? So I'm very pleased to welcome two of our panelists today. We're joined by Julian Ramirez Villegas, who is a senior scientist at CIOT, and he'll be speaking on the role of robust and stable agroclimate forecasting models in CIOT's work to support some of the staple food value chains in Latin America and elsewhere using these forecasting models. We're also joined by Mofat Ngugi, who is the Agriculture Development Officer at USAID, and he'll be speaking on the importance of this multi-sector stakeholder engagement when it comes to designing some of these programs like Feed the Future and others. And Mofat is joining us from Liberia, so if we see any kind of connectivity bandwidth issues, it might be in part because of that. But things that we account for in a digital session. So looking forward to jumping in, and I'll kick it over to Julian to start us with his presentation.
What I'll be describing is sort of a combination of digital and participatory approaches aiming at delivering information and in the hands of farmers, essentially. So in 2015, estimates from the government of Colombia suggest that around 530 million US dollars was the total cost of that El Nino event in that particular year. In that same year, around 1 million farmers in Honduras were basically running short on food because of the same climatic event, basically. And so just to put a little bit these numbers in perspective, of course, you know, 1 million farmers, now it's very clearly put into perspective, but $530 million is around the whole budget that we have globally for the CGIAR research program on climate change, multiplied times 8. Right? So it's a massive amount of money that went just down the drain, and it was entirely basically on the back of farmers. So we see the same type of events happening all over Latin America and all regions of the world as well. So every now and then, now everybody's talking about La Niña coming, but a couple of years ago, everybody's talking about El Nino, and then the crops go dry, and there's massive problems for farmers, and this is all over the news. And one of the things that we've realized is that the meteorological agencies of these different countries where we work, Honduras, Colombia, Guatemala, they all produce really useful information, but this information is in most cases not quite locally relevant. So it's not really translated to the actual context of the farmer. So in the context of large variations in climate and a lot of information available which the farmers cannot use, what farmers mostly do, and there's plenty of evidence in the literature about this, is they plan their crops based on what happened the previous year. So if the previous year they did planted in a given date and it went really well, then they will do the same. Or if the previous year everything went really badly, and then they will ask a neighbor maybe that for whom it went well, and then they will do the same that neighbor did last year. But all years are different, and you cannot plan. It's really hard to plan like that, and this is why we see large variations in productivity as a result of climate variations. So we had this vision in Latin America that we saw this opportunity to sort of bring information in the hands of farmers. But in order to bring information to the hands of farmers, because it's not a simple problem, it's not just a matter of producing more or better information. You actually need to think about how you're going to put it in their hands. So when this is what we call climate information services. So in climate information services, you have a user. Often when we're talking about a user, we refer to a farmer, and you have an information provider. Usually that would be the meteorological service or the farmers organizations or things like that. And then you have to bring information from the provider all the way to the user in pretty much through 4 processes: co-production, translation, transfer, and use. So when you put this technically, we're starting from climate data, we're going from climate data into climate predictions, then we're and combining those climate predictions with yield predictions, and then from that extracting really sort of nuanced information about what farmers could, should, or should not do, and then use that as the basis for the advisory, basically. When this is provided on a regular basis, say every season, then it becomes a service. So how do we do this? We've done it basically sort of following 3 principles or 3 ingredients, you could say. One is basically putting the user at the center. The second is developing better crop and climate models, and then the third thing is going back again to the user and to the users and the institutions around them and empowering them. So the first thing, as I said, is empowering the user. So this is where it all starts, because if you don't understand what the user wants, what the user is planting, when they're planting things, what problems they have with their production, then it's quite difficult to generate locally tailored information. And if you cannot generate locally tailored information, then this information is unlikely to be used by the intended user. So what we do is we do through workshops and through field visits and interviews and surveys, we try to understand what farmers are doing. In doing that, we realize that, of course, we're dealing with all kind of users. We're dealing sometimes with technicians directly, people that have some level of training in agriculture, and they're doing some level of extension. We also deal with all the way through farmers that are illiterate, and then the communication and the strategies that you need to follow with those 2 different groups, just to put the 2 examples, is very different. And what we realize when we talk to users is that some users know what they need, some users don't, but also some users, when you present information to them, they know that they understand it, that they know that they understand it, but there's also users that they think they understand it and they actually don't really understand, because there's key concepts and nuances about the interpretation of the information which they haven't been trained for. So often when we're thinking about the provision of information, we forget that we need to take an approach where we can actually build the capacities of those who are receiving the information. So the second principle is better crop and climate models. So basically we sort of follow these 3 rules, right? So the crop or livestock systems of interest must be significantly affected by climate variability. Then we should be able to get or to develop crop and climate models that are skillful enough to produce reliable forecasts for the next season or for the next few weeks. And then if we cannot get good crop climate prediction models, then we should be able to either develop those or improve the existing ones through more climate science research, climate and agricultural science research, basically. And so through this, we've developed a number of different tools, and these tools we've integrated in what we call the forecast platform, which now is, which was first developed for Colombia. This forecast platform is operational for already around 2 years, and is providing sort of systematic information about whether to plant, when to plant, what to plant, to mainly at this point rice and maize farmers all around Colombia. and I'll get to how this information actually gets to farmers from this website that we've developed, how it actually gets to farmers soon. So where do we place these? This platform is quite important because we need to embed it into a local context. So for us to develop a platform and just make it publicly available is not enough. We need to understand what is happening in the institutions and how information is flowing all the way to farmers, so that we position whatever platform we develop, in this case, this forecast platform, we actually position it right, filling a gap which exists, right? So in this case, we positioned it between the operational seasonal climate forecasts, which are developed by the Met Agency of Colombia, and what is called the local technical agroclimatic committees, which are spaces of decision making which have been created in Colombia and now are scaled out in other parts of Latin America. So through this forecast platform, as I was saying, the users can get an idea of the seasonal forecast, and then they can also, based on that seasonal forecast, get an idea of, for example, what would be an ideal planting calendar, which you can see here at the top right, or you can see an idea of, users can get an idea of what happens with crop productivity if I choose different planting dates. So this is what you can see in the bottom right. So different planting dates on the x-axis, and then different levels of productivity that can be achieved if crops are planted in these different dates. And you can see in there that it's also important for us and for users that there's a transparent communication of uncertainty, which you can see reflected in these bands. Of course, we're talking about probabilistic forecasts, and then those probabilistic forecasts need to be translated into some levels of uncertainty that need to be taken into account. So this platform, we're scaling into different countries. In 2019, 2020, we did a lot of work with the Ethiopian Institute for Agricultural Research, and we created an operational climate services platform for Ethiopia. And in 2021, we'll be working with the Angolan Met Service and the Angolan Ministry of Ag to create a platform like this for Angola. For the rest of Latin America, we aren't using exactly this type of forecast platform, but we're using, in collaboration with the International Institute for Climate Research, Climate and Society, the IRI, we are using what they call the data library, which provides some of the functionality that is needed to access climate forecast. But perhaps most important than what we use exactly for sort of the digital part of this is what, when it comes to principle 3, which is institutional empowerment. So in institutional empowerment, we sort of start from these forecast platforms and these tools that help generate forecasts and communicate this forecast, and we create approaches to bring those to the hands of farmers. So this again is what we call, this involves approaches that we call the technical agroclimatic committees and the participatory local climate services for agriculture. So in the technical agroclimatic committees, this is a little bit of a busy slide, but what you can see in the map on the right is basically all of the locations that have these local participatory committees. And in these committees, basically what you bring is, you bring a group of users, institutions and farmers associated to those institutions, but also farmers which may not be associated to institutions. You bring them into a table of discussion. And then in that table of discussion, basically two things happen. One is that predictions are brought into the table of discussion, and then from those predictions, conclusions are made and recommendations are created on how to act for the next season. Without those, we can create many different kinds of digital services, but then because of internet connectivity, because of difficulties in understanding climate concepts, because of difficulty in even just reading and writing, is going to be extremely complex to reach a lot of farmers. So this is why we've created a combination of digital means with participatory approaches that really help us address these knowledge gaps. So these spaces help us build the capacity and also translate the prediction into a set of recommendations that then get disseminated through bulletins, through radio, through SMS, through even local churches in some cases, into the hands of farmers. Right now, in the whole of Latin America, we have around 35 of these decision spaces or local technical agroclimatic committees in 10 different countries. What we have seen is that there's more than 300 institutions participating in these different committees in the different countries, and what we have estimated is that the reach of these committees is around 500,000 farmers across the whole region. And so by basically following those three basic principles of understanding what the users need, then developing or improving models that basically generate the information that those users need, but also on the other end, generating or implementing those approaches that can bring users together, build their capacities, and enable them to use information. Then we can bring this vision of every farmer basically having the right information at the right time in the right place to life. And that's where I would end. Thank you.
My name is Moffat Ngugi, and I work with USAID Liberia. I'm an agricultural officer working in the Economic Growth Office. And today I'm going to be sort of discussing together with Julian some of the importance of multi-sector stakeholder engagement in designing programs such as Feed the Future or any agriculture programs being implemented. And really with a focus on trying to understand the role for digital or using integrated communications technologies for developing agricultural programs and improving food security. And so the question that had come up was more relating to work is no longer the purview of country governments, and how do various actors sort of find part of the extension work that they can deliver most effectively. So I will start by saying that historically there's been a huge emphasis on the role of government or the role of agricultural workers delivering techniques in a very paternalistic kind of an approach. And these days we really try to think more of sort of modern extension advisory services. So this is where we really try to have and therefore we are basically saying in what ways can we establish networks to build up trust in both delivering new innovations, but also in farmers and other agribusiness actors contribute and extension. And so that's sort of the main difference, I guess, vis-a-vis sort of the old way of doing extension. And ICT and the issue of digital agriculture actually offers up a lot of opportunities to do it, to reach farmers and to inform farmers and to develop their capacity to use all kinds of technologies that will improve productivity and improve yields and incomes and resilience for farmers. So the other key question that I was going also to discuss today is sort of relating to how there are many entrepreneurs and small and medium enterprises working on extension in local context. And so the question comes up on how do we empower those organizations with the right with the right sort of composition and partnerships to best support farmers, and what is missing in sort of delivering high quality agricultural extension around the world. I think we had already a little bit from Julian that on some of the instances, for instance, for example, the examples from the Americas. But one of the ways that we've seen these deployed and that we can continue using and improving is basically working through the private sector. So historically, again, a lot of the role for extension was seen as a public service, something that governments do. And we are sort of coming in the context of modern extension advisory services. We really try to think of the role for private sector. And in the private sector, we are really talking about the agro businesses, agro dealers, transporters, aggregators, processors, and so on, all the people that add value to agricultural product. What is their role in terms of organizing farmers, organizing sort of the improvement of yields and management, including post-harvest handling options for farmers? And therefore, this is a huge opportunity to really help deliver better technology and improved services for farmers. The role, say, for instance, with mechanization and providing services that will help reduce drudgery for farmers and improve the yields, maybe also use improved inputs and so on. That is a huge role that, of course, has historically relied on a public sector delivery of the technology and innovation and so on. But now we see that the role for private sector has sort of become center stage. And within sort of the USAID family, a lot of our work with our foreign assistance overseas on agriculture, we are really emphasizing a lot sort of the journey to self-reliance, where in what ways can we engage the private sector to help deliver some of these services and products, sort of besides what's possible with the public sector. We also know that in many of the countries we work, the public sector itself is quite dysfunctional and oftentimes not well funded to be able to deliver services. And so that's a huge part of the gap that engaging with multiple stakeholders will help deliver. So I've spoken about private sector, but another big player that you can think of is sort of the research community, both in academia, but also in sort of publicly funded national agricultural research institutes. So this is sort of another constituency to think about. And I would say that in many countries, we see that there is a separation between extension and research. And I think as an example, in the United States, what we've seen is a really good melding of research efforts with extension, so that you find that the Department of Agriculture and many land grant universities in the United States have sort of a joint mandate to work together to find what are the problems that farmers are seeing and what could be the solutions to fix those problems. And by the way, you also work with the farmers themselves to help resolve some of the issues and challenges that could be arising. So this again is that concept of multi-stakeholder engagement in terms of extension, so that you really are getting at where the problems are and how to solve them in a very practical way. So there is a huge role there for research and academia and universities. And by the way, in this instance, it's not only just in universities, it's also colleges, technical schools, vocational schools, and so on. The whole aspect of human and institutional capacity development is a big push that gets incorporated when we speak about modern extension advisory services. And in this instance, we really also like to emphasize that we want to draw on and build on the educational system itself, all the way from grade school into high school and into tertiary education. So entities such as agricultural clubs, in some countries there's 4-H clubs and so on. Those are main avenues that could help deliver agricultural knowledge, agricultural innovation, agricultural technology to farmers in order to improve the food security circumstance. And so looking at what's offered in syllabuses for various institutions and so on is quite important. And again, the role for extension is not just government, it's really all these actors along various value chains and so on. The third question that we were going to try to think about was basically what the vision is for agricultural extension for smallholders and what will be the role for digital in this vision. And I would say that maybe some key highlights from my standpoint, based on experiences working with various Feed the Future countries, but also specifically here in Liberia, is that number one, digitalization will really ease a lot in terms of records. We know that we often struggle a lot in having farmers sort of do records, and the lack of records is itself a huge gap that really sort of limits financial opportunities or being able to borrow or to capitalize various agricultural operations. And so once you have better records, banks and other financial institutions are going to be able to sort of service and finance the agriculture sector in better ways, because again, oftentimes financial institutions are shying away from agriculture because they really don't understand it, and they don't understand it mostly because the story and the data and the records are not very well documented. So the minute we have better records, this opens up all kinds of opportunities for small scale holders. That's number one. Number two, I feel like the opportunity to work with social media, this includes mobile finance, but also mobile extension, is a huge one. And I think one example that gets cited, and I'm sure most folks will be familiar with this, is some of the work that's done by Digital Green as an example, where farmers can record in local languages and local dialects, video demonstrations of what they do in terms of improved agronomic practices or other considerations or innovations for their agricultural activities. And all that then sort of enables more and more farmers to know about and to deploy better agronomic practices or good agricultural practices that are going to help improve their yields, their productivity, their profitability, their nutrition, their resilience. So that is a huge part in terms of just sort of social media. I feel like another big advantage of digital and a big vision for digital extension and engagement with various innovations out there right now is really being quite geospatially enabled. The ability to be able to map out, to be able to quantify acreages planted under certain crops or distances to, say, watering holes for livestock, or any number of things that can be geo-enabled. That is going to really improve the way that we conduct agriculture and the work, the results that we can get based on more specific details about what is going on in a given value chain, in a given geography. That's a big other opportunity. And I feel like a huge frontier that's sort of falling upon a lot of the less developed countries right now is the opportunity to expand use of data and agricultural information with artificial intelligence as well as with machine learning. There are all kinds of opportunity there that could really open up how we do our food system and how our populations get fed properly and in ways that are both equitable and are sustainable from the standpoint of protecting the environment, protecting resources, as well as basically being climate smart, because that's also another big thing that we are facing as a planet. So I will stop there, but look forward to our discussion and Q&A.
Terrific. Thanks, Mofat, and thanks, Julian. This is, I think, a great primer for us and where we want to take some of the discussion today. So just really jumping in, Mofat, maybe I'll start with you first to kind of carry on the theme. And Julian, I want to kick this question over to you as well. In terms of what you've laid out here, it seems like there's a role for both what I will call kind of tried and proven technologies in digital and innovation, as well as some of these emerging technologies, things like artificial intelligence or remote sensing and other kind of derived information that are also bringing a lot of potential for extension. How do we kind of balance those two and when to kind of implement more newer tech versus some of these tried and proven technologies? And are there lessons that we're learning from those technologies that have scaled, things like radio and mobile phones and the like, that should be transferred to some of these emerging tech? Mofat, we'll start with you, and then Julian, we'll jump straight to you.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Yes, I would say that it's quite important actually to not forget the radio, for instance, and some of the importance of older formats, and especially in developing countries where a lot of people may not have smartphones. They maybe just kind of have the fast generation type Nokia type phones. And one of the things that have been happening, and an example that I can cite here in Liberia, where we do have major challenges with technology, as already experienced, is that they kind of used USS codes where you can text a number, you can text options, and you can collect information, for instance, about market information based on a text-based system. So that that's one. Another one is interactive voice feedback, where folks who may be illiterate can still communicate and talk to somebody and explain about, this is what we are seeing, or we see this kind of a pest, or we have this kind of a problem, and this is how we are dealing with it, and so on. So there are all these avenues and techniques that are still quite important. The key there being that a break from the traditional, what you kind of think of as paternalistic extension, to a more interactive and back and forth, where farmers and various agricultural sector actors can engage and provide feedback that then the researchers are able to sort of take it on a level and learn from that and have iterative back and forth. So that's quite important. And so what you can think of as dumb phones are still quite important. What you can think of as sort of traditional ways of communication, including radio, is quite important. But TV is also, like television, is also like a huge other avenue where they are very innovative. There's innovative work that's been done. I'm aware in East Africa, for instance, there's a major, I'm sure it will probably come up multiple times during the conference, Shamba Shape Up and Don't Lose the Plot, and all these sorts of activities that really sort of help convey good agronomic practice or good farm management and so on. So all these are quite important. The issue being really sort of multi-avenue kind of communication to help convey the innovations and technologies. Over.
Right. So thanks, Rhiannon. I think that's a great question. I wanted to bring a number here. So there's this paper that was published, I think last week, in Nature Sustainability, that states that between 24 to 37% only of farmers under 1 hectare, they estimate, that have access to 3rd and 4th generation mobile technologies. So, and then the number is larger, of course, if you look at only sub-Saharan Africa. In West Africa, I would say around 90% of farming households have access to only 2G, 2nd generation mobile technology. So maybe in some of these cases, it's not about what options there are. It's about what that we only have limited possibilities given the infrastructure available, right? So so I think for me, the key to address these differences in context, because you also have not only differences in access, but differences in sort of availability, but also differences in access, because say, even if 3G, 4G are available in particular contexts, then the affordability of those things may be prohibitive for some farmer households, right? And then in that case, you may still not be able to get through with a full functional mobile phone app or something like that. And then even if the data packages are affordable and people have them, then you may still have capacity problems. So you may still have use issues, right? So we need to work according to the context, and I feel that in order to do that, the key is diversity. So we cannot just be thinking, okay, this is one single silver bullet solution that is going to work everywhere. We need to think about what is diversity of solutions that we need to have in place to be able to work. And in some cases, you could think of relatively sophisticated sort of solutions which then have a relatively simple front end, right? So you can have like really complex AI algorithms or whatever it is that calculate these different solutions and really context tailoring of their solution, but then the communication mechanism can be relatively simple, like an SMS or a voice message or something like that. In some other context, something maybe more sophisticated means of communication will work. Then the other thing is that in order for solutions to be working, there's also to be working in context, we also need to establish adequate benchmarks. So there's a risk that there will be an information overflow in a way, and then farmers may not be, or people in general may not be able to choose what is best for their interest or what works best. And providing advice doesn't necessarily mean providing good advice. And there's this two-way communication which is always needed in order to develop a good service. And in order to develop a good service, I feel transparency and benchmarking are definitely needed.
Well said, Julian, and I'm glad you both actually touched on a theme that I really want to jump to next, and this came up in both your presentations, this idea of these feedback loops, right? And I think that's also tied into some of what you both talked about in terms of trust and these technologies, and also how do we use technologies to actually build and garner more trust in terms of some of the advisory services that are going out to farmers. And so I'm curious to know, and Julian, we'll kind of start with you here, especially as we leverage more kind of technologies like AI and ML, you know, and kind of to some extent abstract away some of that decision making from farmers and from folks who might be able to kind of tease that out and have more traceability around how some of those recommendations and or information were created. What does that mean for building trust when we're starting to use these kind of, you know, almost like black box technologies where we perhaps haven't figured out how to really unpack the potential bias in those models, or where we know in the past those models, to Mofat's point earlier, you know, have the tendency sometimes to introduce inequities or exacerbate some of the issues that we've seen. How do we kind of balance that out, especially, you know, knowing that we're going to have so many different types of stakeholders engaging in extension moving forward too?
So, yeah, I mean, this is a very difficult question to answer, I think, but I feel that one of the key ways is capacity to use these different technologies. At the end of the day, what we need to be clear is who has the agency, right? The agency is in the farmer or in the extension or in the technician that is visiting the farmer. Is not in the app in itself or in the machine learning algorithm or in the AI or chatbot or whatever it is you want to call it, you name it. Those are tools, and are tools for decision support are not, and they are not making the decisions for people. So we need to be clear on that. And I think that because technologies are available right now, and they'll become more available and more affordable, I think it's also important to recognize that hand in hand with that, there has to be training, there has to be an increase on literacy, there has to be an increase on digital literacy, and there has to be an increase in how people perceive and can actually understand and use this information, and understand how this different information is being produced. If we don't do that, then there's a very high risk that there'll be one, conflicting advice, there will be wrong decisions on the basis of wrong advice, but also potentially wrong decisions on the basis of good advice. And that, I think, so I would say capacity building is the one thing that I would definitely see as a current gap, and bridging digital literacy and those things as a current gap, but also as a gap high priority that we need to address.
Mofat, can we over to you with a similar question, but maybe, in terms of the context that you're working in Liberia and elsewhere, what has this kind of question around digital literacy meant in terms of your engagement, especially with some of the local private sector stakeholders as they do more advisory services? Has there been more attention on that and how they can better engage, in terms of these technologies and innovations as well?
I kind of feel like we are sort of like on the cusp of a wave of like very exciting and very sort of joyful kind of celebration that we finally can fix, or there's the possibility to fix so many things that have ailed extension and sort of agricultural production, and all the challenges that have sort of besetted humanity for 10,000 years, and how we'll overcome it. But in the same, there's sort of a huge risk. It's a double-edged sword here, because as you rightly state, the very tools that are going to be enabling more and easier and better sort of agricultural productivity and equity and so on, access to information and so on, could really also be a major tool for disenfranchisement, isolation, and even more inequality than we already have. So and to me, I think part of the challenge here is really to step into it with sort of the right framing, both in terms of what governments and sort of guidelines from, say, the public sector can be, but also from the private sector people and all the investors that are sort of getting into spaces, working with smallholder farmers, working with various processors in the agri sector. So I feel like the one with the data, the one with or whoever is going to be able to be amassing all this data is going to be king. But I feel like part of the issue is going to be in how can we build trust that if people are providing information, that then it's not in a certain way sort of weaponized against them, but also maybe that same data can also be used for the good. So I feel like understanding and the whole idea with the direction we are seeing on artificial intelligence, a lot of the data-rich environment that we necessarily are operating with a digital sphere, is prone with all these sort of pitfalls. But we also have these sort of peaks from the standpoint of major benefit to society, major transformation in agriculture. And by the way, so of course, this is a bigger societal question for sure. And people are discussing what we see with social media and all the data that we are sort of pushing out there. And what does that mean for individual consumers? And are we removing agency? Are we removing the power of people to sort of self-determination and so on? And is it then being left to an algorithm that then sort of is making calls on behalf of what's going to be happening? And I feel like in agriculture, for sure, the key thing is going to be that whatever tools and whatever algorithms are used, we kind of need to have that inclusion so that it's not left to Silicon Valley sort of coder people to write a lot of what we're going to be seeing in terms of whether it's agricultural input supply or mechanization data about what operations are being done where. So I feel like being quite forefront and discussing these things very clearly and obviously with a lot of informed consent of all the people that, people are getting out with tablets these days, they are collecting all kinds of data. All those sorts of things need to be communicated well. And again, coming back to this question of, I think a key, if we did sort of a word cloud, I feel like the word trust needs to be quite prominent in terms of what we need to do when we're engaging on ICT and agriculture and sort of the digital solutions. Over.
Yeah, well said all around, Mofat. And I think there's, in terms of that piece of trust right now, in terms of kind of focusing and building some of that, I would imagine it's been much more difficult for you both in terms of your work over this past year, dealing with, the context of a pandemic and really in some ways not being able to access the same folks that perhaps you were working with before or as readily perhaps as we were doing before. But I'd be curious to know how has that looked from an extension perspective for both of you? How has COVID shifted what we've been doing in terms of digital innovation, if at all? Have there been, facets of disruption that have been positive out of this? Has there been disruption at all, I guess is part of my question, or is it business as usual? I'd love to just hear kind of more of a almost kind of real-time update from you both in terms of what that looks like now. Julia, maybe we'll start with you and then we'll go back to Mofat.
Yeah, so very quickly, hopefully I see sort of two things. So there's been clear disruptions, and I think some of these disruptions are starting to be quite well documented. In many cases, it's been, let's say anecdotal, but as I'm saying, more evidence is building up. So disruptions in terms of access to inputs, in terms of being able to market the products, and what I've seen in the context of Latin America is that digital innovation has sort of stepped in and stepped up to the challenge of connecting farmers, especially of connecting farmers to markets, whether it's inputs or especially when it's for selling the agricultural products. And so sort of connecting, individuals that are willing to go to the farm and then buy from a specific farmer and bring it back to the market or distribute it around a group of people, that has been there. The other aspect that I've seen is, of course, on the understanding of the situation and the monitoring what's happening. So that's again an area where ICTs and digital technologies have played quite an important role, including for ourselves, trying to diagnose what's happening. So systems that are ready to set up even simple surveys and simple sort of advisory systems to try to disseminate recommendations, even though you cannot really visit farms or you cannot really interact directly with people. And then lastly, of course, and this might seem quite obvious in the end, but in all of the work that I sort of showed in all these climatic committees that are set up in different parts of Latin America, now we're seeing that they start having physical meetings again with all of the 1.5 meter distancing and things. But right at the beginning of the pandemic, it was absolutely crucial that we continued, that these committees continue to operate, because you cannot have a situation where you have a pandemic, then people maybe are growing their crops in suboptimal conditions because of maybe not enough seed, so lower planting densities, less planted area, or maybe not enough access to fertilizer or other inputs. And then at the same time, you would have a major climate event, right? Or some climate variability event, which is really hindering crops. And you cannot it's really not an ideal situation where you would have both combined. So it was important for these committees to keep working, and in that sense, having virtual meetings enable them to continue, basically. And that in the same way that we're doing this recording now virtually, and instead of being physically in the same room discussing, it sort of worked in the same way for those climatic committees. And it might seem very obvious, and of course the participation is less than what it would be if it was physical meetings. So people don't have access to internet, as I have commented before, but still it's been quite crucial, basically. Internet connectivity, the digital technologies which help either connect farmers to markets, connect people between them, but also that help us continue with the activities that we want to do, but virtually.
Well, Fed, how about you? You want to jump in here? How has it looked different in terms of kind of your work, especially there in Liberia, or even, you know, if you have stories from elsewhere? What does it look like? Has it been disrupted by COVID? Has innovation stepped up in the same way that Julian's seen in Colombia and throughout Latin America?
Yeah, I can comment on a lot of what we observed here in Liberia, and I also keep up a lot with our colleagues all over Africa and even Asia. And first of all, to mention that in some ways, the outbreak of the pandemic basically has accelerated, actually, adoption and sort of serious consideration for a lot of digital tools that were already sort of there, and it's kind of now become mainstream. First of all, for a lot of our work, and I'm sure for as most of the world, we're really sort of doing a lot of teleworking, and so just in terms of how we conduct our normal operations, they've kind of gone online and virtual and digital. So that's one big difference. But specifically on agriculture and the work we do here, the development assistance we carry out here, number one, we were able to see sort of deployment of all tools that were already in place as relates cash transfers. So we do have a couple of mechanisms. We work with a group called Give Directly, and at the outbreak, we saw quite an uptick in sort of the deployment of cash transfer. And basically, this is almost like a social protection program. And so we have unconditional cash transfers. We worked with sort of schools as some kids were doing exams, but then also just various households, vulnerable households. So, and that was actually accelerated because of the outbreak. Another thing that we also did in response to the outbreak was distribution of improved seeds. We actually had a program where we redirected resources to help farmers get improved seeds, and we did this actually, and we were just receiving some results several weeks ago, where we were seeing between 50 and 67% increases in yields because of that seed distribution. So in spite of the pandemic, people are actually coming out better than they were, or they would have been if we hadn't done that. So that again is something that's sort of accelerating a few things. We did see also here in Liberia a launch of an agricultural information management system in response, or partially precipitated by the pandemic. What happened? Of course, there were a lot of lockdowns, and what we observed was that for you to be able to travel around the country to various counties and so on, you had to have a permit. And that permitting system was sort of managed by the Ministry of Agriculture here, sort of moving commodities from one point to another. And basically the ministry, the Minister of Agriculture is quite dynamic, and she had just sort of started her tenure, and she immediately launched a platform that is an agricultural information management system that would sort of help track what foods and what commodities are sort of crossing county borders across the country. And actually, for the first time, there was information about such detail that had never been here before. So in a way, it's sort of what some people talk about in terms of never wasting a crisis. And I think we've indeed seen all of that. We were able, as USAID Liberia here, to conduct an assessment that was supposed to have been done in person, and we did it virtually. This was a food security, nutrition, and resilience assessment we conducted. But we weren't able to really kind of get to it, but I'm pretty sure that there are probably other countries and other regions where this came out, is in terms of using remote sensing to really quantify or track our monitoring and evaluation exercises, which has already been sort of historically been difficult, and it always takes a lot. But I think this has opened up a window for being able to use remote sensing tools and things like mapping poverty or mapping agricultural yields and so on. So I feel like we are sort of getting closer now because of this pandemic to really operationalizing a lot of the methodologies that have mostly been in sort of the academic literature, and really like getting it out to operational use, including with drones and so on. So anyway, those are some insights in terms of how we've responded with COVID.
No, great points all around, Mofat, and I love that you bring up remote sensing. I feel like there's a number of questions that we could jump into right now, but I'm cognizant of time, and I believe we're up for now, unfortunately. But I want to say again a big thank you to Mofat and Julian for joining us and for their thoughts on AgroExtension and where the future is here as relates to digital innovation. I highly encourage everyone, if you haven't had a chance already to connect with either of these guys, please do. I think there's plenty more fodder for discussion and follow up, and I'm sure folks have other questions that we didn't get a chance to get to today. So thank you again, both of you, and looking forward to the rest of the conference.
Hey everyone, it's me, Shmaila, again. Thank you so much for joining the sessions in our 5th breakout block. The reality is we've only got one more breakout block and a couple more sessions left before we close out ICTforAg 2020. And we're really happy that you all have been able to join us and excited to have you all join in our grand finale and our closing ceremonies coming up shortly. But before that, head back to your Whova agenda and head to breakout block 6. You've got a couple great final sessions to pick from there. And in the meantime, also make sure to chat with other participants, tweet about us, add us on social media, and add something to the discussion boards. We'll see you all in Breakout Block 6.